Greetings and welcome to Edgy Ideas, the podcast that explores what it means to live the good life and create the good society in our disruptive age. My name is Simon Western, and I will be talking to invited guests about diverse topics, exploring social conscious and unconscious dynamics and desires. Welcome to this edition of Edgy Ideas podcast. Today, my special guest is Jem Bendell. Jem is an emeritus professor with the University of Cumbria. He's worked for over 20 years in corporate sustainability, helping to develop many international initiatives. His 2018 paper, Deep Adaptation, was downloaded over 1 million times and is widely credited with helping inspire the growth of the Extinction Rebellion movement. That marked a departure for Jem, where he concluded that the field of sustainability had failed. His new book, Breaking Together, goes further by outlining a collapse-based political framework. Jem, you're very welcome to Edgy Ideas. How are you doing today?
I'm all right, thank you. I've been hanging out with my mum, and because I live in a different country now, these are special moments. So I'm back for her birthday. How are you?
I'm good. So I'm in the west coast of Ireland and just back from walking the dog on the beach. So I'm alive and well.
All right. It's a nice misty, grey, foggy sort of day here. Is that what it is
Yeah,
there?
same there. Yeah, same
Okay.
here. So let me ask you first. That paper, Deep Adaptation, got a huge amount of attention. Can you say something about that paper and why you think it gained so much attention?
Yeah, so the context was as you mentioned in the intro there, I started working in way back, so 1995 when I left university, went to work for WWF, and immediately I was working in corporate sustainability, even for an environmental NGO. We were trying to help companies source more sustainably. So that was my life, and it was more than a career. It was a vocation. It was a kind of identity. It was a meaning to life. Everything else felt secondary to actually trying to get businesses and banks and financial institutions to take social and environmental issues seriously, incorporate it into their way of doing business, and therefore make it possible for governments to back them up. That was the philosophy. But that was based on an idea that we had time. We had time for incremental change, for reform of global capitalism, reform of large corporations. And if I look back, I think a big part of the idea that we had time was that I thought climate change was something which is an emerging threat rather than a catastrophic scenario that's already unfolding. And I
Mhm.
realized I had that view because I read articles in, say, the Guardian newspaper that were then quoting people talking about the latest IPCC report. So I didn't read the IPCC reports, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, and then I didn't see the way their methodology sidelined because they sought consensus. It sidelined some of the most scary stuff. So what happened was, I started to get worried, and I asked for a year off from University of Cumbria, unpaid leave, because some of the stuff I was beginning to see from about 2013 onwards kind of
Mhm.
thought, wow, why is the permafrost melting already in Siberia? This is weird. We shouldn't be seeing this yet. So then I spent 6 months looking at climatology for myself. I had some background in that at an undergraduate level. So I went back to that kind of reading of the science, concluded that there is a momentum in climate change already, and it's going to disrupt agriculture. So it's not just about killing species. It's not just about 2080 or 2100. It's about us, and it's about very soon. I published that paper as a sort of a kind of a goodbye to my colleagues and my profession. I felt I couldn't just quit corporate sustainability without saying something about that.
Mhm.
So it was aimed for them, and it was initially going to be in a journal, but the reviewers said you can't conclude that it's too late for a managed transition to a sustainable economy. Um, so I just published it through my university as an occasional paper, and then that also helped it go viral because it's easy free download. Back then, not that much academically was as a free download.
Yeah.
Uh, why did it go viral? because it spoke to something that was already there. I think that there was quite a lot of angst within the environmental movement across the West, but um, no one was really naming it as collapse of modern societies is a likely scenario or even inevitable, and that we don't let ourselves talk about it because we
Mm.
kind of want to stay positive and we don't want to upset each other. We don't know how to start talking about having a meaningful life if we no longer believe in or assume progress. So I think it provided an opportunity for people to gather and talk about societal collapse, risk, and readiness, because there hadn't been that much offered before. There'd been deep, dark mountains, but there was sort of like more poetic, artistic discussions of the
Yeah,
ideology of our times rather than something quite in your face
mm,
like Deep Adaptation paper was.
yeah. And has would you say it's had a polemic effect that some people have said, yeah, exactly. Extinction Rebellion. We need to kind of really act now and think about it in a new way. And other people are in denial or closing doors on you. What's been your experience?
Yes, it's not a casual, relaxing analysis. It is quite.
Yeah,
it's it did trigger some emotions.
yeah. And in your book, Breaking,
So
go on.
so yeah. Sorry, just on that then. I talk about it. I lost friends and I made friends. I mean, that's the most sort of tangible way of how it
Yeah,
affected my life. Uh, and yeah, you mentioned Extinction Rebellion. I had when I wrote that paper, I had no idea that some people would respond by deciding they want to go out and call for a rebellion against the government and overwhelm the police and the law courts and criminal justice system and prisons in order to push for a radical change in government policy. That was a peculiar idea when I first heard it, but so many people seem to be responding to my analysis and similar analyses of the climate crisis by deciding to join Extinction Rebellion. And I thought, well, okay, we may as well do what we can to try and cut emissions of carbon and draw down carbon as fast as possible. I saw Extinction Rebellion as like a last throw of the dice on
hmm,
on a more radical mitigation carbon cuts agenda. And let's remember, they called for net zero by 2025, and you and I are speaking what mid
yeah,
November 2024. So, but I thought, why not? So I supported them. I
mm,
helped them think things through with their narrative. I spoke at the International Rebellion launch, but it was never really my message or my idea of tactics.
yeah. So let's talk about your message and your idea of tactics. And you've kind of set that in Breaking Together, and I'm very interested in what you're saying. There's some who say that it's too fatalistic and that this message is paralyzing people. What do you say? What's your kind of core message at the moment, and your strategy for a post sustainability kind of movement?
When you first become aware that the collapse of modern societies is a plausible, credible conclusion from not only the latest science, but also the latest observational data, like what's actually changing in the world's oceans and climate, and also the lack of any substantial impact on emissions or drawdown, let alone all the other uh, ecological problems such as forever chemicals, toxification, microplastics, acidification of oceans. So, um, yeah, it's super uncomfortable. It's just totally disturbing when you first come to realize that, oh, um, this might happen even in my lifetime or in the next few years, or there might be a financial collapse triggered by these broader pressures, which could even happen tomorrow. You know, it all comes super because there's so much uncertainty about when, where, how. it's super disturbing. So I totally appreciate that, and that's exactly what I went through. And
Mm.
every so often, I'm put back into that sort of emotional funk. And so what's interesting though is that people that I've met who really take this to heart have not been disabled by this worldview. They've been radicalized in their own ways. So, of
Mhm.
course, I mentioned that some people joined Extinction Rebellion, and many of those people had to quit a job in the city or Labour councillor. They quit that. They went full time as an activist. But other people decide to quit what they're doing and become life coaches, yoga teachers, or community leaders, or start doing a suburban agroforestry project. Do you know what I mean? It's like all kinds of ways that people decide to drop what they were doing, which was based on a set of assumptions that are no longer true for
Mhm.
them about not only the future, but about the legitimacy of the social institutions in society today. And so there's that kind of emotional, psychological freedom that people discover, and they become radical in their own ways. So that's we know that from there's research on the catastrophic imaginaries. So these are psychological research that
Mhm.
catastrophic imaginaries, so some form of pessimism about the future, is more radicalizing and motivating than the sort of an optimism where we'll fix this through green consumption and solar panels. But also, the proof is there. I mean, a lot of these climatologists are not even armchair activists. They're just like they're just pontificating about activist motivations and what might mean that people don't become more concerned. Because if you just meet people who've changed their lives because of having a so-called doomist outlook, then they would know that it's not causing defeatist, apathetic, nihilistic responses. However, there is a question about, okay, if you're only slightly touched by this message, you haven't got time or capacity in your life to properly read it, think it through, reach a conclusion, then there is a question about how this worldview, this outlook will affect you. And I'm interested in that. But that's a question of how to talk about this, not whether this view is plausible. And I
Mm.
think a lot of people mix those two things up. And there's a lot of paternalistic, possibly even narcissistic thinking within the environmental movement where it's like, oh, well, it might be true that we can't have a managed transition to a sustainable ecological civilization, but we can't tell the little people that, can we? Because then all hell will break loose.
Yeah.
So I say, well, come on, let's it's for me it would be a question of how to talk about these things and how to support people to process this, particularly if they haven't got much time or capacity or spare money to really take a breather and have a think about what to do with their lives. It's not a question of then we should just ignore that this might be the reality we live in.
Yeah. And you whilst there's a strong critique of the collapse of modernity in essence, you also, am I right in saying that you think about eco-libertarianism and individualism as one of the aspects of what you're suggesting as a way forward?
uh, so no. um, I suppose there's two steps in my intellectual contribution. The first was deep adaptation, which is basically a claim that the mainstream discussion about adaptation to climate change is very superficial. It's let's slightly, let's put in irrigation systems, maybe change the crops, maybe build some seawalls, maybe do some land use rezoning. Um, it doesn't really go into questions of how uh, how a massive disruption to societies that's coming really challenges so much about our current economic systems, our political systems, and then also deep ideological stuff about
Yeah.
how we understand ourselves within modernity and what drove us to behave in the ways that created this chaos and numbed us to this chaos and also led us into such useless responses for so long. So
Hmm.
there's that. That's deep adaptation. It's to say, look, let's start talking about this and try and be our best kind selves in this disaster. Let's make the best of a terrible situation. But it's a framework for dialogue. Um, and it's an ethos of not being sort of Mad Max about this, but actually trying to be like, good to each other in this disaster. So that was what I initially invited people into, and I created the Deep Adaptation Forum with other people, which is now an international network. And some people do think, I think there is a kind of global movement of deep adaptation. I keep finding out. I just found out the other day that there's a quite an active group in Chile, South America. Um, there's a huge group in Hungary, one of the biggest in the world, and they're meeting together to like develop school curricula. Like, if you think collapse is coming, what should we teach the kids? There's loads happening.
Yeah.
But what you mentioned my book, and you mentioned eco-libertarianism, which is my subsequent intellectual contribution on this field, what some people amusingly call collapsology. And so, yeah, so eco-libertarianism is absolutely not individualism. So it comes from the the true political philosophy. When I say true, the one that's been around and tried and tested and informed political struggle for centuries, which is left libertarianism,
Mm-hmm.
not the strange reworking of libertarianism post World War II, predominantly from North America, where they totally ignored the power of corporations and markets in the way that they understood uh, unhelpful power, and where they then also reconstituted our idea of freedom as if we don't depend on each other, as if freedom can somehow be purely the grand individual totally autonomously achieving what they want in life, rather than freedom always having been about people working together to improve their lot in life against the abuse of power in all forms. So eco-libertarianism I offer in contrast to what seems to be emerging, which is eco-authoritarianism and its sort of sister eco-modernism.
Mm-hmm.
So eco-authoritarianism and eco-modernism, well, based on the idea that, oh dear, humans are bad for each other and the planet, we need some better technology, and we need to better control and manipulate, coerce, punish even humans for not doing the right thing for the planet. And it used to be a sort of a hidden view within environmentalism, like, Homo sapiens, we're bad for the planet. We're naughty, with a naughty species who need a strict father to come and tell us off. And then eco-modernism, which is selling the lie that we can all just switch onto electric vehicles, which will all be powered by solar panels, and we can just stop worrying about where all the metals will come from and under whose feet they'll be taken, and all that stuff. So
Yeah. Yeah.
this is emerging as the sort of like the dominant paradigm, has emerged as the
Mm.
dominant paradigm in environmentalism. Eco-libertarianism, I suggest, is a different idea, which is that it's not that we're bad, it's that the systems we created coerce us into being acquisitive, competitive, expansionist, othering, and also numbing us to the damage done. We're rewarded. The aspects of ourselves that are like that are rewarded, and the aspects of ourselves that aren't like that are punished, certainly not incentivized. So I want to basically encourage each of us to try to work together to free ourselves from the pressures of an expansionist monetary system that's demanding that we behave in certain ways which are unhelpful to each other and the planet. So I draw from, say, indigenous peoples who talk about us belonging here. We're not separate and better than the rest of nature, and it's just a peculiar delusional set of ideas that sort of started invading the world 500 years ago, that were then put on steroids through the Industrial Revolution, and then were, what's worse than put on steroids? Something else, put on cocaine with modern monetary systems.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, eco-libertarianism is based on the idea of freeing each of us up to try and discover ways of living more in harmony with each other and nature. And I offer that as a different paradigm to what I'm saying is the dominant one emerging. And you can just look to the German Green Party as perhaps the best example of eco-modernism, eco-authoritarianism getting its feet wet in power.
Yeah. Yeah. And do you also draw? I mean, you talk about drawing on indigenous peoples, but do you draw on the early anarchists as well, Bakunin and mutual aid, and do you draw on that tradition as part of your thinking, and or maybe feminism as well? Does that come into your libertarian thinking?
Yeah, absolutely. So this all might this all might sound a little bit airy fairy to some listeners, but practically, it's talking about the need to relocalize more production
Hmm.
and consumption, and to so we still keep producing things which might be shipped a big distance or transmitted electronically, if that makes sense. But otherwise, we should try and uh, promote more resilience in our way of life through relocalizing a lot of our supply chains. We need to reclaim ownership and control in the commons of many resources, especially as big government and big business will continue to fail. In fact, more rapidly fail to provide for basic needs, let alone aspirations of a population. That's just being experienced right now in two ways: just ridiculous inflation for basic goods, energy, food,
Yeah.
and no one having any savings anymore. Everyone having their kids still living with them at home, um, and then huge cuts to public services. So this is the shrinking of the role of big government and big business in providing our basic needs, let alone aspirations. So we need to find ways of working together in community to reclaim our ability to get what we want out of life. So that's a very so yes, with that philosophy, absolutely spot on. Constructive anarchism, anarcho-syndicalism, ecofeminism, Gandhian economics, Buddhist economics. This is all in the broad stable. I mean,
Yeah.
I conclude
Yeah.
the end of my book saying, actually, uh, Schumacher said all this 50 years ago. How ridiculous is it that I had a whole career where I just ignored this stuff because
Mhm.
I wanted to be pragmatic and work with big business and banks and change the world.
Yeah. Yeah. And do you want to share something about what you're doing now? You say you're in Bali. What are you doing in Bali?
Yeah, so I've been living in Indonesia for the last it's almost 5 years, and so I'm back in the UK because of uh, it's the end of the second leg of my international book tour for Breaking Together. So I was funded to get it translated into Spanish, so long as I went to Mexico to launch it. That was part of the deal. So then I decided, okay, I'll do an international tour, and so then it's come out in Hungarian. The book's come out in French. Yeah, so I'm back in the UK before seeing family and friends before I head back. So in Bali, I got stuck there because of COVID, really. And
Mhm.
in that time, I thought, oh, I can do stuff here. My money goes a lot further. So I got to the point of finding it boring to just talk about how I would like to live and how things could be. So I wanted to promote organic and regenerative farming as part of a sort of a collapse readiness agenda, because I thought it'd be quite ridiculous if all I was doing is writing about these things and not
Mhm.
changing my life or helping people change their lives immediately. So in Indonesia, I could sign a 15-year lease on 3,000 square meters and put in infrastructure and hire 3 staff. And I could do it all for about £50,000. And also I could live there very cheaply. So I wasn't so scared about not having money in the bank. So
Mhm.
it just thought, I thought, wow, and if I go back to UK, or I was thinking of maybe living in Portugal or Spain or Greece, it's like it's going to cost me way more, and also I'll have the fear that I need more money to live. So I thought, actually, I'll just get on with it there. So I did. I signed the land lease, 15 years. We found a business partner who really an Australian guy who knows about permaculture in the
Mhm.
tropics. We found a really great Balinese guy who knows all about the traditions of organic farming in Bali, and so yeah, we've launched not just an organic farm, which is a very small farm, so it's commercially not viable, but it works as a demonstration farm for the school.
Mhm.
Um, but it wasn't a very clever idea to um, sell product a service, a training course to farmers in the third world, to use that anachronistic term. It's not exactly the most cashed up market. So we
No.
rely on sponsors
Hmm.
in order to teach them for free. At the moment, I'm realizing that, oh, what have I done? I've come up with I've come up with something I do, which I really believe in. We've taught, I think, 60 smallholders and agricultural college students for free for 10 weeks. Um, and we could teach so many more. We're the only people doing it on the island of Bali for Balinese people for free. But yeah, I've realized, oh no, I've invented a job for myself as a fundraiser. I don't ever want to be doing that. So I've got to work out what to do. Like that's my next 5 months, 6 months. I've been saying no to lots of other things. I need to
Mm.
try and crack this. It's just that how do we make this work so that we can scale up our teaching and keep it going without it just being subsidized by me or me knocking on doors, effectively asking for sponsorship.
Yeah.
I haven't got the answer yet.
I look forward to hearing it when you find it.
Mm.
The other thing, Jem, I've been wondering about is what is kind of inspired Jem Bendel to take this path in life. Like it's quite a radical path. You're asking some big questions. Like many people don't. Many people carry on, and I'm wondering kind of what you think it is about your own upbringing, your own life, your own experience, which kind of inspires you to do what you do.
Um, well, I've got different stories on that, different theories, and what I've also noticed is uh, I'm 52 now, and I
Mm.
just it was just earlier this year I realized for the first time something else about my childhood shaped who I am. Um, so maybe next year I'll have a new answer to your question. But the theories I have at the moment is I was also always super interested in the world as a whole.
Mm.
Dad was in the Navy. Mum was not happy. He was going away to sea all the time. So he decided to apply for shore jobs. And therefore, I had a couple of years in Australia from the age of 3 to 5, and then 2 years in America from the age of 9 to 11. We also moved around in England um, because of his job. And therefore, I got to see very okay, they're all in English, but very different cultures, different ideas about what is knowledge, how to
Hmm.
behave, what to aspire to. So there was part of me that was always not just in the culture, but also observing it. Part of me that was not just thinking that whatever the teacher taught me was like handed down from wherever, but was socially constructed. I didn't use that language back then,
Yeah.
but as a kid, I realized someone somewhere is deciding that I should be studying this amount of algebra or this kind of history and not the stuff I just did in where I was last
Mm.
year. Or where I was in another part of the UK. So that was part of it. Um, and then the other thing was I realized more recently is I was an unfortunate what's the word? Not victim, sufferer of iatrogenic medicine. So at the age of 8, I had some allergies. I'd had to have an operation. Didn't work on my nose. Quite a stupid idea that you stop allergies by burning bigger holes through your nose. But the next idea they had when they decided there was allergies was to do an allergy skin test. And my mum was a bit worried about that and told the doctor, like, oh, should you do that? Because his brother has terrible eczema. And the doctor said, Mother, I'm an expert. And my brother remembers that very
Mm.
clearly as a phrase. Anyway, it exploded across my whole body and gave me very severe eczema for 10 years. What it meant from the age of 8 to 18 is that restricted how much I could participate in normal life as a teenager.
Mm.
So it added to this sort of analyze, be half in, half out. But what it also did was, I didn't realize until earlier this year, it created in me this sense that I am capable of experiencing and witnessing suffering in a way that other people aren't having to. So I
Mm.
think it gave me a deep story of myself, that actually I can do this. I can look at what's painful. I can live with what's painful more so than other people. That may be a nonsense, but I think it was some kind of deep story I got from those 10 years of having very severe eczema and not living quite as
Mm.
fully as freely and in the now as other people. And so maybe, I mean, maybe I'm just trying to make sense of something that happened. But this was an insight I got on a Buddhist meditation retreat that I was co-running in,
Yeah.
I think February this year. Yeah. So who knows? That might be why. Who knows?
No,
uh,
that resonates. I think that's an interesting insight. I mean, I lost a brother when I was 5 years old, and I ended up working in hospitals and with suffering others, and it's kind of been a stream throughout my life. And I think these things are connected, and like turning to indigenous peoples and First Nations peoples who've gone through huge catastrophes. Um, there's a lot to learn. I think from that, draw on those experiences. So I think that's very helpful that you shared
yeah.
that.
I would say, yeah, that's interesting to hear how you've made sense of that bereavement and tragedy in your youth, and I mean, this is important work to do for us to keep
Mm,
open and to what setbacks and tragedies in our lives may or may not have taught us, and realize that we will continue to make sense of that throughout our lives. I do that in the leadership courses. I've always,
mm,
it's the old timeline method where you try and look back and think, how have I ended up being me, and
yeah,
how does that relate to how I might be leading in future. We do it in the new course I teach online called Leading Through Collapse, which I think
mm,
is still maybe the only leadership course on accepting that society is breaking down. But yeah, we do timelines. So
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
interesting.
And it also aligns to what you were saying before about like facing into a catastrophe doesn't mean you just get depressed or you collapse or you get paralyzed. There's it can energize as well. It's not like suffering and catastrophes also do something else to us as well, awaken us in make us more lively in some ways.
Yeah, I think that's happened to me. Um, I can't imagine what life would have been like if I hadn't taken that year off and I'd kept working hard at expanding new sustainability MBA programs and flying around the world to international conferences to talk about, the
Yeah.
standard eco modern story. I might be, I'd be richer, I guess. I don't know. Actually, I do know. I have friends still who still work in that. Yeah, they
Machine.
have very nice houses, and they have
Yeah.
some of them have kids, and some of them don't. But they seem to be mainly motivated by family
Mm,
and the nicer, finer things in life, and they're pretty much going through the motions in work in terms of what it means for the world. Um, and they're more driven by making sure they've got the funding and everything working smoothly for the people in their team. If I think
yeah.
about it, yeah. So actually, they're behaving exactly how people in their 50s in senior management roles and leadership roles used to behave, which got me so angry when I was a young early 30s guy trying to change organizations.
Mm.
so that's
So
so
you
that's what I would be.
escape the trap. Jem, we're coming to the
Mm.
end. I ask guests a couple of questions to ponder on at the end of the podcast, and it's the question is what it means to live a good life and to create a good society. And be very interested if you have any reflections at all on what that means to live a good life and create a good society.
Um, I suppose, well, for me, a big thing is to discover the deep stories or hidden assumptions about those things which have been limiting us. So I realize I used to think that longevity, constituted part of a good life. But that's just why, why, um, and also I think that restricted my sense of family life. I was worried about having children because I thought they might not have a long life, which would be an indicator of a life of suffering. And I realized actually that was just an inherited assumption from my culture, that actually you could have an amazing life and suddenly die awfully at 40. And it
Mm.
doesn't mean your life was any less amazing uh, in all manner of ways. So a good life needs to be could helpfully be detached from modernist assumptions about progress, about longevity, about safety, security, being in charge. Actually, a good life can be more about inquiry, creativity, connection, self-expression, beauty, because in the end, no matter our technological progress, um, however smart we are, um, all all hominids have that didn't become us went extinct. Was it at least 14, maybe more now? So the destiny of the human race was always at some point to go extinct, and I don't claim to know that that's going to happen because of climate change. That's not what I focus on when I talk about societal collapse. I'm not talking about human extinction, but still, it helps you start thinking about these things. And so, yeah, it's like this. It's an old assumption of longevity and permanence about what we're contributing to in this society. So yeah, a good life is more about how we are now, living from the heart, living and being very curious about truth. Um, what was the other thing? A good society, did you say?
How we could create a good society. What does that look
Yeah,
like?
I've got to be very careful with that. As an
Yeah.
eco-libertarian, I don't want me as an old white guy sitting here in the UK talking to you in Ireland, it's like coming up with a vision for how everyone should live, 8 billion people
Yeah.
in all corners of the globe forevermore. Uh, I would love it if these exploitative systems which control us, incentivize us in certain ways, uh, would reduce their power so people could, in their own communities, discover how they want to manage their societies, just how things used to be.
Mhm.
Um, so, yeah, I have difficulty with that question
Yeah.
for that
Yeah.
reason.
Yeah. No, I get that, but I think you're right. I think your book and your work speaks to it anyway in your own way. So
I mean, I invent the term because I felt like it in the book. It's like, because I don't want to keep writing books, let's try and put all of it in one book. And Evotopia, where a place of presence to what is,
mhm.
the prefix evo. So I just love it if more of us could be less determined by the stories we inherit in our culture, be more aware that they are stories, they are provisional, fallible, and we can choose whether we wish to live by them or live by another story, and stay curious. So yeah, I don't imagine that this terrible, tragic environmental situation that we face as a species and that some of us are already experiencing already. I don't I don't assume that it magically invites a spiritual renaissance for everyone everywhere. Some people are going to respond violently. Some people would say some of the levels of violence in the world are to do with a collapsing imperial
Yeah.
system. But I can still work towards and wish for and work towards um, communities where people are discovering themselves and each other and connecting and creating together rather than just sort of rehearsing old stories inherited through their culture, which don't serve them or other people. But where I've got to is to the idea I should keep trying to do that, even though I might
Mhm.
fail in my life or at scale at helping that. So, like that non attachment, which I realize is really important.
Good, Jem Bendel. Thank you very much. That's been a very rich discussion. I'm sure the audience will enjoy it. Thank you for your time.